Good afternoon, Namaskar. We welcome you to this Samvad lecture series, second in this year. Department of Education in Languages, NCERT, welcomes you to this lecture in the series, Samvad lecture series. So, our head will formally welcome the guests and the speaker and also the participants here. So let me just throw light on why we are doing this and how this has been for years. This lecture series started a kind of creating a discourse and conversation dialogue on various aspects of language education, art, culture in the Indian context, and of course reflecting on the global developments. This is the major purpose of this lecture. Today, we rightly have Professor Ianthi Maria, who has been working in the field of multilingual education. And this country, we have brought out the national education policy 4 years ago, and we have been seriously working on promoting multilingual education in this country. In both letter and spirit, through development of materials, creating a pedagogical awareness, rather critical language awareness in the teacher and community societies. So this is the right and apt point of time that we have a discussion on multilingual education and the challenges and opportunities. I was not asking Professor Ianthi why challenges first, then opportunities. Probably she would be answering this, because we know that as policy makers, curriculum developers, and also materials developers, we have more challenges in language education per se, particularly multilingual education. So I personally welcome this speaker of the day, Professor Ianthi Maria, and of course our friends and colleagues from other institutions, Professor Aisha Kedwai from Jawaharlal Nehru University, then Leena Mukhopadhyay from English and Foreign Languages University, then British Council Miss Judith and Nikunj. They are here and supporting us, and Dr. Jacopo from Goethe University of Frankfurt, Germany. And let me also at the outset thank the British Council for having given us the opportunity by bringing them to this country. Aisha is involved in one of the research programs organized by British Council also. So now let me request Professor Farooq Ansari, Muhammad Farooq Ansari, Head of the Department of Education and Languages, to formally welcome the speaker and the other guests. Sir, Professor.
थैंक यू प्रोफेसर मेघनाथन। सभी को मेरा आदाब, नमस्कार। मेघनाथन जी ने संवाद सीरीज़ के लिए बता दिया है कि हमारी जो विभाग की जो लेक्चर सीरीज़ है संवाद के नाम से, ये जो प्रोग्राम है आज का, उसी की एक कड़ी है। तो ऑन बिहाफ ऑफ डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ एजुकेशन इन लैंग्वेजेस NCERT, मैं अपने तमाम जो गेस्ट यहाँ पर हैं उनका स्वागत करता हूँ। साथ ही जो ब्रिटिश काउंसिल से जुड़े हुए लोग हैं जिनका नाम अभी लिया, मिस्टर जुदनाथ और मिस्टर निकुंज अग्रवाल, इनका भी स्वागत करते हैं। स्पेशली जो आज के हमारे गेस्ट हैं इयांथी मारिया, जो कैम्ब्रिज यूनिवर्सिटी में मॉडर्न एंड मिडिवल लैंग्वेजेस एंड लिंग्विस्टिक फैकल्टी में है, वहाँ से आपका जो है संबंध है, और हमारी रिक्वेस्ट पे जो है उन्होंने आज के इस लेक्चर के लिए जो है अपनी एक्सेप्टेंस दी है। आई एम वेरी ग्रेटफुल मैडम कि आप वहाँ से यहाँ आई, और चूँकि उनको आना ही था तो हमने कहा इस मौके का बड़ा अच्छा फ़ायदा उठाया जा सकता है, तो हम आपके विचार को यहाँ पर सुनना चाहेंगे। तो आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है, वेरी वार्म वेलकम from our department and CERT, and other fellows, Mr. Jocopo, जो गोवा यूनिवर्सिटी से हैं, इज़ आल्सो हेयर. मैं उनका भी वेलकम करता हूं. साथ ही जो है आयशा किदवई, प्रोफेसर जेन्यू, उनका भी स्वागत है. बहुत दिनों के बाद मैं उनको आज देख रहा था, बड़ी खुशी हुई. आपका भी तहे दिल से हम यहाँ पर इस्तकबाल करते हैं. बाकी हमारे जो डिपार्टमेंट के हमारे जो वरिष्ठ साथी हैं, उनका भी स्वागत है. और तमाम जो लोग हैं जो हमारे विभिन्न प्रोजेक्ट में जुड़े हुए हैं, उन सब का जो है हम यहाँ पे स्वागत करते हैं. और चूँकि एक बहुत इम्पॉर्टेंट कह सकते हैं विषय है जिस पर हम लोग बात करते रहते हैं, मल्टीलिंगुअल एजुकेशन पर. हमारी NEP 2020 में भी ख़ास तौर से जो है एक पूरा एक भाग जोड़ा हुआ है मल्टीलिंगुअलिज्म एंड लैंग्वेज पावर करके. तो बहुत सारी चीज़ें उसमें की गई हैं और हम लोग निरंतर प्रयास कर रहे हैं कि उसके लिए मटेरियल डेवलप हो, कुछ टीचिंग लर्निंग मटेरियल इस तरह का डेवलप हो जाए जिसमें हम तमाम स्टेट्स के जो टीचर्स हैं, चाहे वो SCERT में हों, चाहे डाइट्स में या और, उनके लिए कुछ इस तरह के हम मटेरियल को उनको दे सकें ताकि वो उसकी रोशनी में आगे जो है अपने तमाम टीचर्स को किस तरह से अपनी पढ़ने पढ़ाने की जो प्रक्रिया है उसमें मल्टीलिंगुअल का जो अप्रोच है हमारा, उसको किस तरह से, क्योंकि उसमें बहुत सारी चीज़ें हैं. हम जो भारतीय भाषाएं हैं वो तो हैं ही है, साथ में क्लासिकल लैंग्वेजेस भी हमारी हैं, फॉरेन लैंग्वेजेस भी हैं. ये सब उसको सामने रख कर के जो है किस तरह से पढ़ने पढ़ाने में इसको शामिल किया जाए. बहुत सारी चैलेंजेस हैं हमारे सामने जिस पर हम लोग बात करते रहते हैं. आज भी इसी सब चीज़ों को लेकर के हम लोग बात करेंगे. तो ये एक बड़ा अच्छा मौका था हमारे सामने जिस पर हमने चाहा कि इस मौजू को लेकर के बात की जाए. तो मैं ज़्यादा कुछ नहीं कहूँगा क्योंकि हम चाहते हैं कि इस मौजू पर जो है अपने जो मुख्य वक्ता हैं हमारे उनके विचारों को सुने, फिर हम अपनी चर्चा में उनको शामिल करें. आप सब लोग जो है उसको अपने सवालों के ज़रिए कुछ एडिशन इस तरह की चीज़ों में. तो सभी लोगों का मैं एक बार फिर तहे दिल से इस्तकबाल करता हूँ, स्वागत करता हूँ और थैंक यू.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Let me formally introduce the speaker. That's the convention here. Professor Ianthi Maria Tsimpli is the chair of English and Applied Linguistics and co-chair at the faculty co-chair at the Cambridge University, United Kingdom. She has worked in the University of Reading and also as the position of professor and Professor of Multilingual Education and Cognition at School of Psychology and Clinical Language Sciences, University of Reading, and also Professor of Psycholinguistics and Director of Language Development Lab at the Department of Theoretical and Applied Linguistics at Aristotle University, Greece, and of course a lot of research work and things, and currently with British Council in India and of course Jawaharlal Nehru University with Professor Aisha Kidwai. She is one of the principal investigators of the multilingual education program in the Delhi Tamil Education Association schools. It's a kind of unique experimental design to understand how multilingualism works in a diversified multilingual context in urban situations like Delhi. It is part of the British Council study one in Assam and other in Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, and this is one of those studies. So let me request Maria, please. And we have budgeted this way, 40-45 minutes is okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Then followed by we can have question and answer session and sharing of ideas. Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, it's a great honor for me to be speaking today to you and with you. I'm delighted to have been given the opportunity to speak at NCERT. I have to say that I've been coming to India to do research for the last 9 years. And this research is now helping me and my project team understand better where the challenges are, but also the multilingualism that is so widespread in India is the unique opportunity for these challenges to be overcome. So hopefully I'll be able to see my slides. Right, okay, great. So I chose to start with what the national education policy say. I'm pretty sure that all of you know it by heart already, perhaps better than I do. But the important point in the national education policy is that it does suggest a programmatic agenda for multilingual education. And it actually gives a lot of priority to mother tongues and to home languages of learners, actually suggesting something that psychologically, emotionally, but crucially cognitively makes a lot of sense, which is that we start with school skills in a language that we have already. So we have from home, and we can build our understanding, our cognitive development, and so on the foundations of this language, and then at the same time we can develop more linguistic competencies, not only in our home language but in other languages as well. So moving on to the next slide. So I don't have control of the slides. Yeah, okay. Right. So in school education in India, as you know, languages are an opportunity, but they're also a challenge. So I know that NCRT and the government, state governments and the central government take into account the huge linguistic diversity of India. And that linguistic diversity is found in schools as well. So in the study that we did in the MultiLila project that we did in collaboration with the British Council from 2016 to 2020, we actually saw that particularly in schools in Delhi and in schools in Hyderabad, so two urban sites that we had, there was a lot of linguistic diversity in the classrooms. So we had 7 or 8 different languages spoken by the children in these classrooms. And in these schools, sometimes the medium of education was English, sometimes the medium of education was Hindi in Delhi schools or Telugu in Hyderabad schools. In these classrooms, it was obvious to us that the medium of instruction was the one that determining the language of the textbooks, the language of assessment, the language that the teacher aspired to using. But in reality, the children sometimes wanted to use other languages as well to be able to understand better what was meant to be conveyed. And this was particularly obvious in schools that had English as the medium of instruction. And I will show you some data from there. If I could have the next slide, please. Right, so I know that NCRT is doing a lot in terms of the spirit of national education policy, the new national education policy in 2020. And there is work that is done for multilingual education in Odisha. And if we could move to the next slide, please. Also in Jharkhand, tribal languages, these are used as medium of instruction. I just had the opportunity to look at these new primers, the books, the textbooks that have been developed by NCRT on different languages. And they are amazing because obviously they introduce children to words in these languages, but also to some level of foundational literacy in these languages because the script is also introduced. If I could have the next slide, please? Right, okay, so this is the project I mentioned before, the MultiLila project. The MultiLila project was a collaboration with Cambridge University. So I was at Cambridge at the time. I was the principal investigator of the project, and I was quite fortunate in having excellent collaborators in India. So the first one I should mention is Professor Leena Mukhopadhyay, who was and still is at the FLU in Hyderabad. Professor Minati Panda from JNU, who is a psychologist who has worked on multilingual education in Orissa, and Professor Suvarna Aladi, who at the time was in Hyderabad. She's a neurologist. She's not an education person. She's a neurologist working on multilingualism and memory. And it was extremely important for us to have her contribution. She's now in Bangalore at NIMHANS, and she's a professor there of neurology, and we've published this work together. What is really important and was a revelation for her as well, because she works on elderly people with memory decline and memory problems. And she was very excited to see that our children from our schools who came from multilingual households actually had better nonverbal intelligence. So their scores on nonverbal intelligence were higher than children coming from monolingual households, and they also had better working memory. All right? So she was very pleased to see that the advantages that she could see in the elderly could actually be found in primary school children. So in this, if you could show the slide so that people can actually, no, the previous one, please. If you could just leave the slide on, good, great, thank you. So I just want to show that this is the evidence base on the basis of which we continued with the projects that we are currently running. The MultiLila project involved assessing 2,500 children from standard 4 and 5 in Patna schools, in Delhi schools, and in Hyderabad, all of them government schools. And they were assessed in a number of different tasks. So they were assessed on literacy in English, in Hindi, and in Telugu. They were assessed on oral language skills, that is, how well they could narrate a story. On numeracy, on, if you could leave the slide on so that people can follow, thank you. On problem solving in maths, and on IQ and cognitive abilities. So this large project produced a database which you can actually find online. It's free to access. There is a website for MultiLila, which you have on the slide there, and you can actually see the full report of the project there. What was very important for us is to understand through that project the reality of multilingualism in classrooms, as well as the challenges that children face, but also the opportunities that have not been harnessed yet by multilingualism. So if I could have the next slide, please.
You can update yourself.
Can I? That's great, thank you. So this is just one. We have published more than 15 papers on that project, and whoever wants to have access to them, please let me know. I mean, you can find them on the website. But what you can see here, I mean, this is one of the most interesting graphs, I think, which are on literacy performance in the regional language, either Hindi or Telugu, and in English in these children. So what we use the ASER tool, which, as you know, does not include any comprehension questions, though. It only asks children to recognize letters, to read words aloud, to read sentences, and to read short stories. But there is no comprehension component at least not in the version that we had, which is freely available as well. And we used the answer task for Hindi, for Telugu, and for English. And what you can see in this graph is for each of the sites that we conducted the research in, so Delhi, Hyderabad, and Patna, the performance of children on English, which is the light blue column, and on regional language, that would be Hindi or Telugu, depending on the site, in each of the components of the ASER task. So we start with the letter recognition. You can see that letter recognition is quite good in children. Then you look at word reading, paragraph reading, story reading, and finally comprehension questions. So I hope you can all see that when it comes to the regional language, the performance of children is much better than it is in English. What is particularly striking is that comprehension in English, even in English medium schools, was quite low. So I would urge you to think a little bit more about the importance of using English only as a medium of instruction, or English alongside other languages that the children find it easier to understand. And this is in the spirit of the national education policy as well, which suggests more like a mother tongue-based multilingual education. And that mother tongue-based multilingual education is the message that comes through from UNESCO, from UNICEF, and from other major associations that have compiled an evidence base from, not just from India, but from many other countries as well. So what we found was that comprehension overall is not very good. I just want to point out, I'm sure you all know the ASER tool. It's not a standardized test, as you know, but it's a test that's been used with hundreds of thousands of children, not only in India, but in other countries as well. And I think what is really interesting and important is that comprehension for the ASER test is aimed at grade 2, at standard 2, all right? So these children are much older. These are children that are in standards 4 and 5, and still they're not at ceiling. You would expect them to be at ceiling to perform 100% because that's for a younger, age group. So we identified reading comprehension as the biggest problem, okay? So the whole MultiLila project ended up with a message which said we have to do something about reading comprehension. And I mean, I know you're all experts in everything that has to do with the development of school skills, educational materials, and so on. But I just want you to think for a minute about how a typical classroom works. From what I've seen in government schools in Hyderabad and in Delhi and in Patna, the teacher, particularly in schools where English is the medium of instruction, the teacher stands in front of the children and reads sentences from the textbook, expects the children to repeat the sentences, and then move on. That is something that I found almost uniformly across the 3 sites. Now, I'm sure there are schools which do something different, but from my experience, this was what was happening. Now, maybe this offers children some good input in English, but it doesn't really tell the teacher anything about how much the children understand from what they're reading, because there is no interaction. Now, when it comes to theories of reading comprehension and what it needs as resources to build on, we know that there are 2 things that are important for reading comprehension. The first is to have orality, spoken language skills. And the second one is to be able to decode, that is to change the graphemes that you see, the letters, into sounds, all right? If you have these 2 things and you put them together, then you have the basic ingredients to achieve reading comprehension, okay? But even if we have that, there are certain strategies that the teachers need to present to the children to improve their reading comprehension. Reading comprehension doesn't come just because you know how the words sound, or because you know, for example, how to speak the language. So in the UK, there are many studies that have shown that children who have English as their only language, so these are monolingual children, reach year 6 of primary school, which is when they are examined with national exams that are called SATs. And what we find there is that there is a good percentage, something like 30% of children who actually lag behind. So they do know how to speak English very well. They do know how to decode, but still they have problems with reading comprehension, which means that reading comprehension strategies is something that we as teachers need to teach to our students, okay? And these comprehension strategies include things like questioning the child about the content of the text, making sure that they understand the vocabulary that is used in the text, and being able to think about and inferentially think about the content. Now, when you have a reading comprehension deficit or problem, that can lead to very little learning, particularly when the language of education is not familiar to the child and there is no critical thinking while reading that is encouraged. So, moving on. Okay. So we found this issue with reading comprehension, and we thought, let's try and see if we can create an intervention to improve particularly reading comprehension and children's reasoning or critical thinking skills. We have been fortunate to have a number of funded projects that allowed us to continue working in Hyderabad from 2019 to 2023. And now we are currently working in Assam and Delhi in 2023 to 2026. This last project is funded by British Council in India. And the previous projects were funded by the British Academy, but also the British Council for the ELTRA project, the smaller project, and a number of other projects from the University of Cambridge. Now, the important things that I wanted to mention to you as the pillars, all the building blocks for this intervention. The first one is multilingualism, and here is where I see multilingualism as being an opportunity rather than a challenge. Multilingualism, we know from many studies, not in India, but in other parts of the world, that it is an essential resource for developing metacognitive skills and critical thinking. Multilinguals have better understanding of the phenomena of language. They have better understanding. They can stand, from a distance and look at their communication behavior better than monolinguals, okay? Monolinguals seem to become communication and language knowledge is one. But in multilinguals, communication is something that they can look at, okay, and monitor better than just as part of their language knowledge. The second point which I would like to emphasize, and this is something that is not very clear in the educational system of India that I have witnessed, I'm sure there's a lot that I don't know, but one of the things that we want to build on for this intervention is orality. So oral language skills, oral abilities in different languages is a strength in the Indian population. It's a huge strength, and it's a weakness in Anglophone speakers. All right? I just want to make this message very clear. The average adult Indian speaker would speak 4 or 5 languages. All right? not necessarily read them and write them, but they would be able to speak them, all right? And something along these lines is what we see in children, okay? That they're very good at using the languages they have, but they're also extremely good at learning new languages because they are already multilingual, because they are already exposed to diversity in languages, okay? So our intervention program builds on this orality, which is, as I say there, an unparalleled strength in India's primary school learners. And it is mostly due to the fact that you're all multilingual and you have that as an oral skill mostly. But it's also because of your tradition in storytelling, which is a cultural and linguistic resource for building education tools on. Okay, so storytelling ability is something that is, as you know, here for centuries, has been here for centuries, and it's something that we need to build on. Just to mention, there are studies in the US which use an intervention just on storytelling to improve children's abilities in school skills. And these children are children that come from low socioeconomic status, okay? And these studies have actually shown very beneficial results. So you have another strength, which is this narrative culture, and this culture needs to be used for school skill development. The third building block in our intervention is the agency of the learner. So we ask the child to participate in the lesson. We don't expect the teacher to do everything. The child needs to be there, awake and happy to be in the class, responding to the teacher, but also responding to the other children. For all of these to work, we need to do teacher training, as you could guess, and teacher training is essential because even if we have all these opportunities in India and in schools, teachers need to feel strong and confident about using them in the classroom. So the new intervention model, we call it Multi-Ed. It's the name of the project that is funded by the British Council. It took place in Hyderabad and it's now taking place in Assam and Delhi. And from the teacher perspective, we have some pedagogical strategies apart from the linguistic strategies that are integrated with the linguistic strategies. So first of all, we focus on students, we focus on learners. And for that, what we do is we encourage teachers to allow children to think about questions on the text in a peer group discussion. So we ask children to sit on the floor or to turn their backs, and talk to the ones that sit behind them and discuss questions that are prepared by the teacher. But the important thing here is that the discussion is in any language that the child feels good about, right? I mean, so it could be on the target language, the language of the text, or it could be in any of the mother tongues that are used or in the regional language. Importantly for the teachers, we need to have them plan their lessons, follow that in their teaching, and finally assess. And across this planning, teaching, and assessment, we expect multilingual resources to be used. Okay? It's quite important that, of course, we structure the way that the multiple languages are going to be used. So I'm giving you just examples. I won't be able to give you the full details, but if you are interested, I'd be very happy to share the lesson plans that we are developing. We are creating a handbook, which we are going to present to NCRT at some point to see if they can give us their blessing about whether the mode and the method is good. But just to give you an example, this is a text in English, And the teacher was asked to identify words or expressions that the teacher thought would be difficult for the children in the class. Notice that it's very likely that if you present the children with English texts, they're very likely to have problems, right? Because their level of English is not very good. So what we offer there is oral production of paraphrases, translations, discussions of these topics in Hindi and Tamil in the current project in the DTEA schools. And we also create, what you see on the side, a multilingual word bank, which the teacher prepares as part of his or her lesson plan, and then brings it to class, not for the children to memorize the words, but to use the different words or to think of the different words so that they can be helped in their understanding. Now, in this example, the text of the textbook is in English, and the supporting languages are Hindi and Tamil. But you can do it in any way you want, okay? So you could have English and Tamil as being the supporting language and Hindi being the target language, or you could do Tamil as a target and English and Hindi as the supporting languages. Now, what is the difference between the target language and the supporting languages? The target language is the language of the textbook, okay? The supporting languages are primarily oral, which is what children like. They don't want to be presented with 15 different scripts because that would be very difficult for them. You can still have language teaching of Tamil, language teaching as a subject in the curriculum, right? But you don't need to have all these different scripts in one class. And by the way, this is not about English language teaching or Tamil language teaching or Hindi language teaching. It's about content learning as well. So the medium of instruction in whatever, it's environmental science, mathematics, whatever subject you want, can be adopting this type of multilingual resources. So in our intervention so far, we have used English as the target language because, first of all, it's the language that is least supported in this country by orality. All right? Whereas the other languages are supported because they are indigenous languages, okay? Secondly, because it's not the language of the community, at least not in the children that we have tested. The children that go to government schools, when they leave the school, they don't speak English. They don't go to their family to speak English, and they don't speak English when in the community, in the market, and so on. So we used Telugu and Hindi and Assamese as, Telugu and Hindi in Hyderabad, Assamese and Bengali in Assam, because many of the children in the schools there speak Bengali, and Tamil and Hindi in Delhi as supporting languages. So this is an example of how we try to scaffold comprehension in the target language by using multilingual spoken language support. Okay, orality is very important. So this is an example of the word bank that the teacher is supposed to come with, before the lesson begins, having identified the words or the expressions that he or she thinks are going to be difficult for the students to follow. And on the basis of that, use in a structured way, in a planned way, multiple languages, the ones that are used by the children, to support understanding. Now, this is the peer group discussion. This is my favorite part of the intervention because I have to say that I have attended some of these classes that Vrishali has, she's been going around India basically training teachers and researchers for implementing that intervention. alongside Lina, of course, and Jacopo and myself and Ayesha. And what is really important is that when I attended classrooms in the beginning in Hyderabad, children were sitting, well, not like you. I mean, you seem more comfortable, but the teacher was standing there speaking to the children. The children were sitting there taking notes, looking at her, and there wasn't much interaction going on, right? By the end of the intervention, when we went back to the schools, there were lots of smiles on children's faces. The attendance of the children had increased, according to the teachers, because they were very keen to go to the school, even though it was an EMI school and they couldn't understand half of what was written in the textbook, right? But they were still going there because finally they could understand. They could understand because their languages were used, okay? And the text became clearer to them. So these peer group discussions are great. They actually allow the teacher to have a break as well. The teacher has to organize the groups and then give them the questions and ask them to talk about them in whatever languages they want. So that's purely multilingual or translanguaging mode. And this is to discuss comprehension questions that are already prepared by the teacher. Okay, this is one happy result that we had from the first intervention that we did in Hyderabad. In Hyderabad, we looked at expository text, so text that includes academic school language like environmental science. And we had an intervention group of 170 children that were followed for a period of 7 months, and a control group, a comparator group that was not presented with the intervention. These children were in a low-cost private school, all right? Notice the difference. Now, if you look at the graph that I have there, and you can see that the government school children are the red line and the private ones are the green one. What you see on the left is the beginning of the intervention when we tested them before they had the intervention, right? And you can actually see that the children from the private school were doing significantly better in reading comprehension than the children in the government school, all right? And what you see, we had another point of testing, which was halfway through the intervention. And this is where the difference was reduced when you see 1 star there, and that 1 star says the difference is still significant, but it's not as significant as it was when you had the 3 stars. And by the end of the intervention, the final point of assessment, what we found was that the intervention group improved by 30%. As a result, they caught up with the private school children, and there was no difference between them. So we are very happy that this happened, because what we see is that children sometimes going to private schools, may have better resources, at home. Their parents may have better resources in literacy. We don't know, right? But we know that there may be a difference in favor of these children. And what we saw is that actually the children from government schools can go against all odds and perform at the same level if they have the right type of multilingual education. So what we are doing now, thanks, is not just plan multilingually and teach multilingually, but also assess multilingually. And I know this is a huge problem because we all understand that it's very, summative assessments are unilingual. We only have one language, whatever that language may be, okay? But is it possible to make children perform well in this unilingual assessment when they're in secondary school, for example, if they have been exposed to multilingual formative assessment during their primary schools. So if we encourage the children, as the National Education Policy says, to learn through their whole language repertoire, all right, then we as educators have a duty to actually assess them also during these years of scaffolding, comprehension, and knowledge in multiple languages. So if we can look at this slide again, yeah. So that ensures continuity between learning and assessment, okay? So the advantages of multilingual assessment is that you can scaffold understanding of content, particularly when you're not testing the language as such, but you're testing the content through the language, okay? You have greater ecological validity because you don't ask the child to suppress any language that they feel comfortable with. And it's also, ecological validity is found in multilingual learning. So this is an example of the assessment that we have used in Hyderabad with English and Telugu. So I'm sure you cannot see the little script there. It's in English. It's a text from a textbook, but we didn't take the whole text as it was. We chunked it. We fragmented it. Because what we see is that children are not able to understand and answer questions if you give them a long text, right? You have to make it, you know, piece by piece, you chunk it, and then you ask questions in order to scaffold comprehension. Now, how did we do that? It's very important that we used both oral and written assessment, okay? So it was both oral in the sense that the teacher was reading aloud the questions and was reading aloud the text. We didn't just give the text and the questions, the multiple choice comprehension questions to the children, but the teacher was reading aloud because, as I said before, orality is a strength in Indian children. And we have to build on that strength to improve their literacy skills, okay? So we had questions in Telugu and questions in English. Now, in reading comprehension, we need to learn how to make inferences, yeah? So to integrate different pieces of information from within a text, that's a local inference. And the global inference is when we bring information from our background knowledge together with the text. It's important for children to know what is relevant to answer a question, what information they need to consider. So we have seen, and in fact, Jacopo Torregrossa, in some of his work in Germany, he has found that with multilingual assessment or bilingual assessment, children show better reasoning skills, better critical thinking, okay? Why? Because they can process the information better because it's in more than one language and that helps understanding, and they improve their thinking skills than if it's just conducted in one language. Okay, so what you see in the block there with the blue is just to show to you that we had two groups. One group was the intervention group, the experimental group, and the other was the control group. Now, for both groups, some of the questions were in the same language, in English, okay? And some of the questions were in different language. So the same question for the experimental group was in Telugu, but in the control group was in English, okay? So it is, the content of the questions was exactly the same, okay? But the language in which we used for the experimental group was either Telugu or English, whereas in the other group, in the control group, it was just English. And we had different types of comprehension questions. So for example, causing decay, this is part of the expository text of the environmental science textbook, causing decay and damage to them. Hence, to avoid these, neem leaves are placed in the storage bags. So we created the multiple choice comprehension question: what helps maintain food and we gave 4 choices. These 4 choices and the question were read aloud by the teacher to the children, because that makes their life easier, right? They don't have to read to understand. They can listen and read at the same time. So that's the multimodal part. Okay, so we used the same with English language textbooks, and we had questions in English and Telugu for the experimental group, and just in English for the textbook. So I don't have much time, so I'll just go quickly. Yeah. So these are examples. I can come back to these examples when you want. But just to tell you the results of the assessment, right? Because I think every time people talk about translanguaging and the benefits of multilingual education, they leave assessment aside. Because assessment is something that is extremely challenging if you try to do it in more than one language. So what we are trying to do, and we know that it may turn out to be controversial, but what we are trying to do is to show that actually children perform better if in comprehension of both language and content if you give them more than one language. So the results are what you have here, the summary of the results. The assessment in English and Telugu facilitated comprehension of the environmental science significantly, so that's the content benefit. It helps students understand vocabulary and retrieve information. The use of Telugu in the comprehension questions and the answers helped the child scaffold the comprehension of the rest of the information in the text. But what I want to point out to all of you, because I think that's the most important finding, is that the responses of the children in the intervention group compared to the control group that had English only, in English, questions was better in the intervention group. So the children in the experimental group were significantly better in their responses to the English questions than the children who had only English. Okay, and I think this is the most important message from this, because we are all concerned. I know parents are concerned, education authorities are concerned, you are concerned about the development of English in schools. But if we come and tell you that, actually understanding and performing better in English is achievable if you use another language there, which the child is more familiar with, then I hope we can see that this is not an obstacle that we cannot address, okay, through multilingual education. Now, before I finish, I just want to say that we have done a lot of pre-service teacher training, okay? We have done a lot of in-service teacher training. I have asked my good colleague Lina about EFLU and the teacher training programs they have there for pre-service teachers, as well as other people who work in teacher education. And it seems that at the moment, there is no compulsory module or part of the pre-service teacher training that talks about multilingual education, okay? And I think this is a big gap which we need to fill. I don't know if you're going to fill it from the NCRT. I don't know, how it's going to be done. But I think that the only way you can implement something like the National Education Policy, which argues for multilingual education, is if you make a more practical set of training, skills available to pre-service teachers. And these pre-service teachers would be given templates of lesson plans, and they could use any language they want. They could have types of assessment. They could have types of textbooks they could use, which would be beneficial for that type of multilingual education. If that becomes part of the mainstream training of pre-service teachers, it will be easier for NCRT and for education authorities to implement multilingual education. So the focus of the teacher training workshops that we used was multiple. It was focusing on learner, it was pedagogical, but it also gave concrete examples of how to use multiple languages when teaching, and the importance of orality, the importance of peer group discussions. And what we have here, which is the pre-final slide, I think, is teacher perceptions. How did the teachers that we trained and participated in the intervention feel about the translanguaging strategies in classrooms? And you probably can't see we asked them questions at the end to reflect on the translanguaging strategies that they were encouraged to use. And overall, the response was very, very positive, okay? So they were happy to use translanguaging. They felt it was more comfortable for them. They felt that the children felt more comfortable about it, and so on. So I think that we have the support of the most important stakeholder, which is the teacher, in this. And I think this is a very good step forward. So to summarize the intervention results, the intervention in Hyderabad was successful. We had better reading comprehension skills as a result of multilingual interventions. One thing that I would like to point out is that, as you know, many children that go to government schools come from challenging or underprivileged backgrounds. But in any case, poverty and lack of literacy support at home did not, although it influences how the child performs currently in the school, it actually did not prevent them from benefiting from the intervention. And as I said, the teachers reported higher student attendance. We also had socio-emotional benefits, which for some of you I think are the most important ones, that the children in the intervention classes actively engaged with the lesson and were smiling. The teachers in the intervention classes were more relaxed, confident, and engaged with teaching in a multilingual mode. So we are still working in Assam and Delhi in the Tamil schools. And we are in the process of collecting and analyzing the data. Just one thing I wanted to say is that even if you know of teachers who are in unilingual schools like these Hindi medium schools or English medium schools or Tamil medium schools and so on, what we have found, and we are going to make this public database, is that teachers never just use one language in class. Whatever the official language of the school is, we have published these results. Hindi medium school teachers, English medium school teachers, Telugu medium school teachers do at least 30 to 35% of the lesson in a mixed mode, okay? And if you are in an English medium school in Delhi, at least in the period when we did the MultiLila project, we had 0% of sentences that were produced by the teacher only in English. It was 0. It was in an English medium school, it was Hindi, but also a large proportion of the time it was a mix of code switching, Hindi and English, okay? So I think that whatever we suggest as what is the medium of instruction, perhaps we shouldn't worry too much about that, because instruction happens when the teacher and the children feel that they can understand, all right? So I think we shouldn't go just, prevent ourselves from looking at what multilingualism is. Multilingualism is a reality in classrooms, in spoken language. Let's make it also in written language, and let's make it also a more structured process so that our children will feel more comfortable learning in our government schools. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ianthi. There are lots of messages to everybody, of course, to us in NCERT teachers, and the learner agency you brought in, and also the community. And your last statement, no Indian classroom is purely on one language, is a reality. I studied Master's English Literature. We used to say, I did my MA English Literature in Tamil medium. So this is how English literature classes are also taught in this classroom, interpretative. So this is how even the best English medium schools, which claim to be using, there are schools in Chennai-like places, using the other language other than English is a punishable. The children are fined. That failed. So thank you very much for bringing out this. There are lots of messages, and we in NCERT, we believe in the philosophy of mother tongue-based multilingualism as a policy, as also the whole language repertoire, whole language perspective, which you touched upon. But however, we have issues at the classroom level, since textbooks are written in individual languages. So thank you very much for bringing this with research evidence which supports the claims of National Curriculum Framework 2005 as well as 2023, of course, the policy. So now the house is open for discussion, questions, ideas. Yes, please.
My name is Rajiv. My concern is related to the area you mentioned about scaffolding for comprehension.
Yes.
I developed a multilingual textbook-based glossary during my PhD for English language learning. And making the dictionary was not difficult, but the concern I faced was related to pedagogy. There were languages, for example, in a state like Jharkhand, presence of 4 or 5 languages in a classroom is a common thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, and majority of those languages do not have script. And these children, they understand it orally, but written way is a far-fetched thing for them. So, my question is, suppose I'm teaching a poem. So, should I be repeating each sentence in those 5 languages each time? And if I come to assessment, how do I go about it? Because there's no script.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think so. I mean, it is. I'm not saying that the teacher shouldn't have to make some difficult decisions when you have a multilingual classroom in front of you. Obviously, there may be 10 languages that are used by the children, but in terms of scaffolding comprehension, the peer group discussions could be in the 10 languages, as long as there are at least 2 children that speak the same language. Because if there are languages that are only spoken by 1 child, obviously you can't have much of an interaction. But there is no harm in allowing children in the peer group discussions when they're trying to understand a text with your guidance, that is, you're going to ask them to focus on something in the text that you are interested in. I don't know if it's poems that, you're talking about poetry, but as you know, non-literal use of language, which includes fiction, right, and poetry, is always more difficult and requires a certain level of proficiency in that language. So it depends on what level you have of proficiency in your students. The question of whether you should be using or you should be translating, this is a very good question because I wanted to clarify this. Translanguaging or language mixing or allowing these multilingual practices, for me, does not mean translation. We are not into the business of translating from one language to the other for the child. What we are trying to do is, here is your target language, the one you have on the text, yeah? You can use orally other languages in specific parts that you as a teacher have already identified as being difficult for the children. And at that point, you start asking questions to the children, which you can ask in whatever the language of the text is, or in any of the other languages that you have, and you know that some of the children would understand as well. That allows understanding to happen. Translation as such doesn't help, because translation is quite rigid. You need to, particularly, when you're looking at English language textbooks, which I'm sure you have looked at a lot, what you see is there is a lot about terms of emotion, how characters in the story feel about something, how they react to something that happens to them, and so on. This is the narrative type. These emotion terms are very difficult to translate, truly translate. Languages differ a lot in the emotional vocabulary. There are nuances that, for example, you can say, okay, this means jealousy and this means envy. But actually, how different are they? It's actually different depending on the context in which you use them, yeah? And whether you want to be more formal or less formal and so on. So translation as such, so that's one thing. Translation as such, I don't think it works. What works with different languages is asking questions about that part of the text that you think they're going to find difficult, or they tell you they find difficult, or you can guess they find difficult. So asking questions, questioning is essential for understanding, for comprehension. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that it's not the case that we need to do it for the whole text, only for individual parts. And these parts need to be prepared in advance by the teacher. In other words, it's not that we go into the class, we have a text, and we're looking at the text and say, oh, maybe suddenly is a word that they won't understand, okay? We do it in advance. Why? Because we need to prepare some other sentences that include suddenly, so that we help within the same language the child to understand how they use the word. So the first thing is translation on its own doesn't work. I think questioning works better. The second point is that we shouldn't, even when we identify the area of difficulty that we think the child has with a particular text, I think what we need to do is use that difficult word or difficult expression in other sentences, not in isolated words. One of the things that I saw with the primer books, which are great for foundational literacy. Foundational literacy is great, and you need to have this initial input, in the script, into the script of the language and the words as well. But really, language is not words. Language is sentences, text, connected speech, communication. For that, you need more than a translation of one word into another word. Because if the child doesn't hear that word that is difficult used in 2 or 3 other sentences of the same language, yeah, they won't get enough input to understand. Their brain does the job. You don't have to do that. The brain does the job. They hear the sentence in 3 or 4 different, the word in different sentences. Then they can abstract away what the meaning is. But if you're trying to just translate the word into a word that they know in another language, it's not going to help them much. First, because they're going to forget. Yeah? And secondly, because understanding is not deep. When you offer the translation to them, okay, the child will try to memorize this. But that's not understanding.
If I can add to that, translation is mostly like a product.
So the child does not get an opportunity to navigate through the two languages. So when we introduce, like as Professor Ianthi was saying, that the teacher selects some materials and those have to be focused on. So those difficult materials then become an opportunity, like a launching pad, to generate more of the language. So on one hand, the target language navigation and using other L1s, and it could be other dialects as well. Like in the Indian context, like the Jharkhand example that you were giving. So it's not only the mainstream state language, but also other dialects or other languages which the children might bring to the class. And the teacher, through the act of questioning, could utilize those languages in order to generate more meaning in the target. But translation rids one of the opportunity to like understand meaning in the target, because it's like a product, right? But on the other hand, we also have the teacher act of explanation. So explanation can be done in other languages, need not be in the target language, and that is not like a translation strategy. That is much higher. So the point is to be able to utilize the languages, exploit them, but to keep in mind that the goal is to also develop proficiency and understanding in the target. So that only teachers can do if they are given this kind of a meta-level training of how to exploit the linguistic resources instead of just translation.
Thank you for that. Yeah, please.
The other part of it, like I was talking about assessment. So how do we go about assessment when the language doesn't have a script yet? And those languages also belong to different language families. That's the case in Jharkhand schools largely.
So that's also a very good question. And obviously in the examples I gave you from what we have done, both Telugu and English have scripts. And so, we could use them. But I did, I think, mention that it's quite important that the teacher also reads aloud the text and then the questions, the comprehension questions. So what I would suggest, if the language doesn't have a script, is you have the text in the language which has a script, right? And then you can have some of the questions orally presented to the children in the language that doesn't have a script. And if you do that systematically, I think you're going to have the same results of scaffolding of comprehension that we had with Telugu. Let me just say that the reading of Telugu was not easy for the children. So it's not the case that, they found it easier to read Telugu compared to English. The decoding of English is very good in Indian children. I mean, what we found is that they can read aloud, and they can read aloud in many different languages. That's not the problem. The problem is comprehending what they're reading, okay? And so I think that in the way I presented it, if instead of the written Telugu, you had a question that is presented orally in the language that doesn't have a script, that would also do the same job of scaffolding comprehension for the target language.
Thank you. And you also, I think, indicated that assessment can take a back seat while teaching.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, multilingual teaching.
Yes, definitely.
Namaste, ma'am. My name is Abhishek. First of all, I would like to congratulate your beautiful and enriching lecture, Multilingual Education Challenges and Opportunity. My question is related to one of the challenges related to multilingual classroom. As far as multilingual classroom is concerned, some of the people here belongs to those students who are from humble background. We learn language. There are so many methods to learn English, like or any language, direct method, grammar translation method, suggestopedia, the silent way. But some of the students learn this language with the help of mother language or home language. That is the grammar translation method. But in this method, this is the oldest method and also good method. but it affects our fluency. As far as writing is concerned, I have not faced any such type of problem. But as far as fluency is concerned, we have to, there is a culture of silence found in classroom, those students, because in multilingual classroom, student came from so many cultural and linguistic background. Second question is related, when I start speaking, or those students start speaking, they have to use code switching or code mixing. This is good or bad? My question. Thank you.
It's good. My answer. So, okay, let me just give you some background on this. First of all, I'm not a fan of the grammar translate. You know, I'm really not a fan of that because it helps you develop some strategies in how you read. You know, you memorize things, right? But the whole problem, which I started with, is we want children to be able to understand. Because if they don't understand, they cannot be educated. I mean, if they don't understand the language, they will not be able to understand the content. If they don't understand the content, and the Indian system is very much based on written language and textbooks, they're going to have a cumulative effect of not learning. And when they reach secondary school, they will either drop out or not be able to perform well, right? And I mean, if you look at the statistics of who goes to higher education, you will see that the results are very indicative of the problem with the pedagogical way of addressing literacy and numeracy. In terms of language mixing and code mixing, this is something that is completely disallowed in countries like the UK, in the sense that if you start code mixing in a classroom in Cambridge, or you might have one or two people who will understand, but the rest will not, right? So the method is ignore the multilingualism in the classroom and go for one language only. The difference is that in the UK, you use English in the classroom, ignoring all these children that speak other languages. I mean, there are some classrooms that have 90% EAL children. EAL are children that have English as an additional language, which means at home they speak another language, right? Now, but these children, when they get out of school, they still hear English. When they go home, there will be an effort, of the parents to speak English, or when they turn on the television, it will be English, okay? But here, when we try to have English as a medium of instruction, this is a language that they're not going to hear when they leave school. So code mixing is a way into English, all right, in a society, and such a linguistically diverse society as in India. Now, I just wanted to say that in the MultiLila study, we looked at whether children had 2 or more languages in their household and which language was used in the school. And what we found is that when we looked at literacy in English, we found that the children who were already speaking more than one language were better readers in English, could learn English better than the children who only had one language at home. Which means, and this is not a unique finding, it's been found in other studies in other parts of the world, if you speak many languages, you are more likely to be able to learn a new one. Easier, right? And what we saw in the children at the end of the intervention, in some cases, the children had better English than the teacher. And this is encouraging code mixing.
Any other? Okay. Thank you very much. And we will have some felicitation of the speaker and the guests. So we request Professor Farkan Sari to offer the flower pots and the books to
Ianthi.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
To Professor Aisa, you go down there. Can you, Professor Lina?
I hope I don't kill it in the next 24 hours.
Professor Lina Mukapete from IFLU. And the book NCRT publication, Veer Katha, sir? Sir, Veer Katha, kitab.
Thank you very much.
It's Paramveeravadi Chakra.
This is a special publication of NCRT on our brave heroes at the war front. Yes.
Great. Thank you so much.
You can, Judith. Where is Nikwi? Please.
And can I just say that there are some reports that British Council has, and one of them is about the MultiLila.
Talk about it.
Yeah. So yeah, Judith, do you want to?
You speak it. Okay.
You can. Oh. Yeah. So.
I've just shared the video.
You shared it. Okay.
Related reports.
Right, so there are reports by the British Council, and there are QR codes on this, which you can scan, and you can look at the MultiLila reports, the project that I've mentioned several times already. Yeah, and these are available for you to check. Yeah, there aren't enough for everybody, but you can always check them out and perhaps find them online.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Then I request Professor Saryug Yadav, Professor of English Language Education, Department of Education and Languages, to propose vote of thanks. And before that, let me thank British Council for the support, and Professor Aisa also, Lena. Then please.
This was a wonderful opportunity for all of us. We know that, a significant talk on multilingualism education, challenges and opportunity by Professor Maria. And the beauty of the talk lies in the fact that she touched upon almost all the important aspects of multilingual education, and it was research based. She shared the research in very simple, lucid language, which reaches to the audience. We know that NEP 2020 has put much emphasis on multilingual education, and actually this is the last ritual that I have to propose vote of thanks, but I can't help my temptation to just point out some highlights which she has proposed before us, presented before us. Up to now, I think no doubt NEP 2020 has highlighted so many things, but it is very difficult to comprehend. But the way she presented before us, all the challenges, all the interventions, and those interventions are research-based. And I believe that, she talked about multimodality, multilingualism, and she also talked about socio-cultural aspects of language. We know that when we talk about multilingualism, cultural aspect is very, very important. And this is a great challenge before the teacher in the actual classroom situation. So I believe that if you will, you have listened to her carefully, critically, and you will read those write-up properly, so many problems will be solved. She also talked about that pre-teacher education needs to take care of this aspect.
in-service teacher education needs training properly. This is true because real implementation of multilingual education can be possible only when we have real teacher in the classroom. So kudos to Professor Maria, and I am very thankful for her illuminating, igniting talk, and you provided us opportunity to listen to you. And it is a great benefit for the audience. We all were enlightened by your illuminative talk. So I express my deep sense of gratitude on behalf of Department of Education and Languages and NCRT as a whole. And I wish that in future we will also get opportunity to listen to you. And besides her, because this became possible, we know that quality is not an accident. It requires a lot of endeavor, collaboration, also support from other persons. So, Mr. Judith Hembron, Miss Judith Hembron, British Council, Mr. Nikunj Agrawal, and besides them, we have also, because it was written in the beginning that this talk has been presented in collaboration with Professor Leena Mukhopadhyay, IFLU, Hyderabad. We know that she is a good linguist professor in Hyderabad, and she is a good researcher, a lot of experience of working in real field. So, ma'am, I am grateful to you for contributing and just making the talk qualitative. Professor Aisa Kidwai, JNU, I know that she has a vast experience of working in this area, and we all know teachers that experience cannot be challenged. So we have to learn a lot of things from ma'am, because even at this age she has such energy, such patience, that she believes that a teacher can be possible only who remains always a learner. And then Dr. Jacopo from Goethe University of Frankfurt, he deserves also our thanks, because he also contributed a lot in making all this so a great success. So besides that, our all audience who are present here, you just patiently listen to this talk, because nowadays sometimes it becomes very difficult to get good audience and sizable number of audience. But I am very happy that even to listen good things, we have at least this much audience, and they remained here to listen to this beautiful talk. I am grateful to all the faculty member of Department of Elementary Education and all the faculty from NCRT, from different departments, all the staff of DEL who supported us in making this so great success. Once again, I thank each and everyone for making this so wonderful. So thank you very much once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ianthi. Thank you very much. And we also thank those who are online, and also our grateful thanks to Central Institute of Education Technology for making these arrangements. Technology makes everything possible. Thank you very much. Thank you. Then we will have a cup of tea on the other side, 246, room number 246. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.